Hi, I'm Malika Bilal, and you're in the stream.
And I'm Dan Ming. In Hungary, is there an assault on critical thinking, or is the government simply protecting national interests?
Today, we'll look at a new law that many people believe puts academic freedom under threat. Opponents of a new education law in Hungary say it singles out Central European University and could force it to close.
The prestigious graduate school was founded in 1991 in Budapest by Hungarian-American George Soros following the collapse of communism. Since its founding, the school has been operating free of Hungarian oversight, something proponents of the bill want to see changed. The new law sets tougher conditions on foreign-based universities that operate in the country.
The legislation has sparked fierce opposition in the streets of Budapest, with large-scale protests almost weekly. Demonstrators say the law is a threat to academic freedom, but the government calls that charge a flat-out lie. So what's next? Well, joining us to discuss that in Budapest, Peter Marton. He's a PhD candidate at Central European University, or CEU. And András Stumpf, a senior fellow with the conservative weekly magazine Heti Válasz. And Lily Bayer. She's a journalist covering Central and Eastern Europe with a focus on far-right movements, the refugee crisis, and democracy issues in Hungary. Welcome everyone to the stream. Now, we did invite representatives from both the Hungarian government and Central European University to take part in this discussion. Both declined. So let's start with the protests here on my laptop. Peter, you were there as I play this video from the AP of thousands demonstrating against the government. What was it that brought an estimated 80,000 people to the streets for a school with fewer than 2,000 students? Peter?
Okay, well, the footage that you're showing is from a demonstration that was not specifically for CEU. It was for a different issue connected to CEU, which is a law that that the Hungarian government is planning to pass that would
So Peter, we're going to fix your audio. All of us we're touching our ears there because it dipped a little bit. But Lily, can you give us a little bit more context on what Peter was saying? The people out there were there against and in protest against a law targeting NGOs and also a law targeting what some say is a specific university.
That's right. So what we've been seeing is that there have been a couple of laws coming over the past few weeks that really sparked a new protest movement here in Hungary. The first one was the law on Central European University, a law that would in effect make it impossible for the prestigious institution to operate in the future. And the second law is one that targets foreign-funded NGOs that is designed to stigmatize NGOs that act as watchdogs, in particular in the human rights field. So a lot of Hungarians have become incredibly concerned that the consolidation of power that we've seen here in Hungary at the hands of the government of Prime Minister Orbán is becoming also a crackdown on civil society, including both an independent university and NGOs that have been acting as a check on the government.
So Lily, we saw those tens of thousands of people in the streets. And it was ostensibly about the NGO bill and the university law. I wanted to play this video comment we got from you with a little bit of pushback on why those people are out there. This is from Miklós Zantho in Budapest. Take a listen.
If we are talking about the protests on the streets of Budapest, we shall not overestimate the importance of these protests, as these are thousands, 10,000s people marching on the streets. It is totally clear that this amount of people were continuously protesting against the government in the past years. So it's not a new phenomenon. These are the same people and same intelligentsia who are protesting now against the government again.
So Lily, what do you think about that? You said that these are the same people who protest everything that the government tries to do. What do you say?
I would say that we are seeing something new here. And that new thing is that we're seeing young people coming out to the streets. And not only young people who study at the Central European University, which, as we have mentioned, is actually a very small institution, but a lot of Hungarian students that go to Hungarian public universities and even public high schools. I've been going to observe a lot of these protests, and I've talked to a lot of young people in their early 20s who are really coming out to protest for the first time. And what they're telling me is that they are frustrated with the Hungarian government. They see that the government's actions are undermining their future here in Hungary, and that they want to see a more democratic Hungary with checks and balances. And so I would push back on the idea that we're seeing just the same old people. It is true that some activists who have been in the streets in the past are at these demonstrations, but there is a new segment of the population that is waking up and becoming politically active really for the first time.
András, what's your take on it? Is this about one university, or are there larger implications?
No, it's not about one university. It's of course about the Orbán government itself. And the 80,000 people became this Saturday. It was only 10,000 or 20,000. So there are a lot of protests now in Hungary, but they are weaker and weaker. So I don't think it's a very big thing that 50 or 80,000 people are there, because if you look at 2014, as Orbán tried to tax the internet, 40,000 people were on the streets, and Orbán had to take back that bill, and it was not enforced. So this is nothing really new, but I agree. There are some thousands of youngsters that were never on the streets before, and this is a generational feeling now, and something like they never experienced before, to protest against the government. So there are some thousand, yes, but this won't harm Orbán, and he won't resign because of these protests. That's quite sure.
Peter, your take on it? Help us understand what this bill, which is really just an amendment to Hungary's higher education bill, what it means for your university and how it would actually affect it.
So if what the government wants to achieve would actually take place, so if there would actually be a bilateral treaty negotiated between the state of New York, or contrary to the United States Constitution, if there would be some way to negotiate some treaty with the federal government in the U.S., then that would mean that the Hungarian government could actually impose some sort of restrictions on the way that CEU functions. So it could mandate certain rules for who the university could hire, what kind of curriculum the university could actually teach. So it would impose severely on the academic freedom that CEU students value so much, and that CEU researchers value so much. So that's the big fear that we have.
So I hear that, but this is what the government says. They directed us to this statement. Everyone will eventually realize that this is not about closing universities, but about applying the laws equally to every Hungarian university. You can see the rest of the statement here on my screen. Lily, do you understand what they're trying to say? They're saying they're just trying to make things equal across the country. And why should this one university be special?
That's right. So the official government line at the moment is that this is a regulatory issue and not a political issue. But what we have seen actually over the weekend is that Prime Minister Orbán himself, in an interview to a pro-government newspaper called Magyar Idők, admitted that this is a political issue when he said that our vision of Europe is diametrically opposed to that of Soros-style international networks. He talked about how George Soros and NGOs and the university that he supports are not in line with the values that the Hungarian government is promoting. And so, in effect, throughout this interview, he admitted that the moves that the Hungarian government is taking against NGOs and against the university are not purely a regulatory matter. And this fits with a larger strategy here. There are two reasons why the Hungarian government has chosen to go against these NGOs and to go against CEU. The first is that there are elections coming up next year. And one way that Prime Minister Orbán is trying to rally voters around him is by creating enemies and scapegoats. And he sees NGOs and the university as great potential scapegoats that he can present to the public and say, I can protect you from these nefarious forces. And the second thing, as I have mentioned, is that there are issues of checks and balances here. The Hungarian government has been trying to weaken independent institutions, and the NGOs and the university are both strong independent institutions that act as a check on the government.
So Lily, on what you were just saying, we have a tweet here. I want to read it to you from Martin. He said, Orban's regime is refined by corruption and the need to create imaginary enemies and fight them. Hopefully that's a losing strategy. So do you think Soros fits into this category of an imaginary enemy that Orban sort of props up to rally against?
I do think so. Some commentators have actually said that if George Soros didn't exist, Orban would have to invent him. I think he is one of those enemies that Orban is imagining or trying to present to the public as a nefarious force that is trying to undermine Hungarian interests.
I want to pause here just so all of our audience is on the same page. Andras, I hear you, and I want to get you in next, but I do want us to understand who George Soros is. Take a look at my screen here. He is the founder of the Open Society Foundation. You can see that website here. There is pushback against his organization and the things that he funds. He's a billionaire philanthropist, of course. This is a report that came out in 2016. Top U.S. human rights groups fare poorly on openness about funds. And so this is what that research looked like. How transparent are think tanks about who funds them? 2016. They found that Open Society, if you scroll all the way to the bottom of this list, highly opaque. So clearly not very transparent. Andras, does that matter? Should that matter? Of course, Soros founded this university, but as of right now, currently, they don't seem to have that much of a relationship. In fact, when we reached out to the Open Society and George Soros's foundation, they directed us to the university.
Yeah, the university and all the other NGOs, these are two separate things. So the university is a very good one. If you like to study economy in Hungary, in Budapest, you might come to the CEU. They are just very, very great. So it's not an NGO, but there are still a lot of Soros-founded NGOs and Open Society financed NGOs that are really working as a network and are not transparent, and you cannot see who and how much money they get. So, and I don't really think that is a big problem in Hungary. But if you look at Soros and all this open society and open borders ideology that he has, and he expresses all the time, well, then it is true that it is absolutely against the Hungarian government's standpoint, and also I think Hungarian national interest. So that is true, but that's another question. If you have to fight this by closing universities, I say no. This is not the way to do it. But the problem is there. I don't think it's the biggest problem on earth, but it is a problem. The other thing that I don't think we were very surprised as the CEU bill came in, because of course it was very quickly made. But if you look at the speeches of Orban last December, he gave an interview to the Hungarian national radio, and then he said the year 2017 will be the year of the fight against George Soros. So he was telling the whole nation this.
A man true to his word.
Absolutely no surprise. Yeah, so it was no surprise that the NGOs and of course CEU, that was funded by Soros, will come and will face some serious problems. The other thing, and I think it's very important, that Orban made quite a big mistake with CEU. So the reactions were much bigger as he thought, I think. From the US, for example, he thought that, okay, Trump won, and Mr. Trump won't bother with the Soros University. He can close that because Trump and Soros are, of course, natural enemies. But this is not the way it happened. The Trump government said no. We are absolutely against closing an American institution. The Germans are very upset. much more than Orban thought. So I think he made some mistakes, and this is why this bill won't be in force. I think they will find some kind of a solution in the next month. So because the pressure is just too high on the Hungarian government.
Let me just address the question of transparency with the NGOs. Right now, Hungarian human rights organizations that get funding from the West are actually very much open about their funding. If you go to their websites, you will find a full list in their annual reports of where they get their funding from. And actually, the new legislation that the Hungarian government is considering wouldn't really change much of these requirements. What it does is it would force these organizations to put labels on every single publication, leaflet, press material that says we are foreign funded. And in that, the government is aiming to stigmatize these organizations.
Sorry, can I just jump in for a sec? Because I think we just stepped over a very important point that was mentioned by András. So he seems very optimistic that in the end nothing's going to happen with the CEU bill, and they're going to find some.
I'm not optimistic. George Soros is optimistic. He said the CEU will stay.
Okay, but listen, I just want to make a point though. The point though is that this is not the way that a country should work. This is not the way that legislation should be made. You shouldn't have to backtrack from the legislation that you propose, the legislation that you are supposedly for 100%. 2 weeks after, and you have the State Secretary for Education. It's also very sad that you don't actually have a Minister for Education in Hungary. That's
well, I totally agree.
The State Secretary for Education is backpedaling and is saying all sorts of things that are very difficult to interpret from a legal point of view because they simply don't make sense. So that just goes to show that there's a bigger problem with the way that decisions are made in Hungary. And it goes to show that it's really problematic that the stakeholders are not even consulted in many of the cases when you have these legislations being proposed. So if you look at the civil society legislation, I also think it's important to emphasize that many of these organizations actually do things that a normal state should do. So they provide legal help for refugees. They provide legal help for those that are in underprivileged situations. They provide a level of transparency that the government many times does not provide by itself. And on the other hand, you have a government and you have a prime minister who spends on things that eccentric billionaires usually spend their money on. So if you take George Soros and you say that he's funding some of these NGOs, then isn't he actually doing a job that's supposed to be done by a responsible government? So these are 2 points that I think are very important to make.
So Peter, just hold on 1 second. Peter, I want to pose this video question to you. So on this issue of foreign organizations and then Hungarian interests and whether or not they're opposed, we got this video comment from the same person who I played a video comment from earlier. Take a listen. This is from Miklas in Budapest.
On one hand, we shall see that this whole story, the protests and the whole framework is not about the Central European University and is not about the proposed amendment to the act on civil organizations, NGOs, but it's about the importance of the influence of Mr. George Soros and his idea of open society, which is clearly against the interests of nation states.
So Peter, he's making an argument about sovereignty here. What do you say to the idea that these international institutions are at odds with the interests of everyday Hungarians?
So there are 2 things that I'd like to emphasize here. First off, I give very little credibility to that organization and the gentleman that you just played, because he's someone who's advocated that Hungary should actually lead the European Convention on Human Rights. If there's a verdict that comes down that is against the interests of the government. So and there are also some reports going around that the funding of that organization is especially problematic, as it might be funded by the government itself. That's one thing. Secondly, answering your question, I don't think that providing a top 50 university in Budapest that has performed extremely well over the past 26 years and has given a lot of Hungarians a window towards the world and has brought in world-renowned scholars to Hungary is a problem and is against Hungarian society. Secondly, I don't think that providing transparency for government spending suing the government, to have them, public, to have them give information to the public, something that they don't do by themselves, something that many civil society organizations do, protecting the environment, something that many of these civil society organizations do. There is actually no environmental protection ministry in Hungary. So I don't think these are things that are against Hungarian interests. They are absolutely for Hungarian interests. So this is something that is really easy to attack because you have a lack of awareness on the one hand, and on the other hand, it's really easy to make a boogeyman out of a small organization that doesn't necessarily have the adequate amount of funds.
Peter, one of the things...
doesn't actually want to get involved in day-to-day politics.
Right. And Peter, one of the things you mentioned a little bit earlier is that one of the problems, as you see it, is that the stakeholders involved weren't all consulted. I want to show us all a little something. This is a statement made to the media, Hungarian website, HVG, by the Education Secretary. We never wanted to close down CEU. The question is whether CEU insists on having a license in Hungary or having courses in Hungary honored with a CEU degree. We actually got a response to that statement from the university. CEU is aware of a proposal by the state secretary expressed in an interview in the media. We are open to any lawful and long-term solution that would ensure academic freedom and institutional integrity. This solution evoked in the press does not appear to be legally and operationally coherent and certain. Lily, what do you make of these two statements? The university is essentially saying we weren't consulted and we're learning about these things via the media, whereas the government seems to be saying we're giving you a compromise. Do these two things and you can stay open.
As far as I know, there are actually no direct talks right now between the government and the Central European University, which is part of the problem. Again, going back to my first point, this seems to be a political rather than a regulatory issue. The government is trying to make it out to be a regulatory issue, knowing that, in fact, there has to be a political agreement. Now, we've seen the U.S. government asking, officially, the State Department issued a statement asking the Hungarian government not to implement the bill that was passed and was signed by the president. The European Commission has actually announced a probe to see if the legislation is legal in terms of European standards. So I think that while that is going on, we'll have to see what Brussels has to say, and we'll have to see how this will play out politically in Budapest, whether or not the government will budge. Right now, we're not seeing the government budge because it is in the government's interest to continue with its crackdown on the Central European University.
There's another solution.
I'd like to just read one more tweet. So Cass says, Orban will compromise on the CEU. International attention and pressure will disappear, and the NGO law will be implemented without much fuss. András, do you think that's possible?
Yes, well, we have to talk a bit about the Constitutional Court, too, because now the bill is before them, so they have to decide whether it's constitutional or unconstitutional. So it can be a solution that the Constitutional Court says this is unconstitutional, and then it's no bill anymore. So that can be the easiest solution of the problem, of the CEU law problem. What you quoted, what the State Secretary Palkovic said, that was after the big buzz, after the reactions, after the international reactions, and that just shows how the government, what I told you earlier, how the government tries to make it softer and tries to act like they never wanted to shut down CEU. They did. They wanted to shut down CEU. That was the goal, but they won't succeed. That's what I'm telling you now.
And Peter is nodding his head there. Peter, your last word?
I definitely hope that they don't succeed, because it would be a crime against Hungary, actually, to expel such an excellent institution, such a window towards the world, such a place that gives so many Hungarian students a lot of opportunities, and not just students from Budapest, but a lot of underprivileged Hungarian students, and brings a diversity to the city that is desperately needed.
Peter Marton, András Stump, and Lily Bayer, thank you so much for being here for this conversation. Now, if this legislation passes, the law will take effect in September. We will be watching to see what happens. A big thank you to our guests and, of course, to our community. And until next time, we'll see you online. Take care.